Dawn broke cold and pale over mountains in northern Italy on April 18, 1945, when a strange silhouette moved through the morning mist near the Polish II Corps' artillery positions. Smoke drifted low across the valley. Trucks rattled over loose stones. And in the middle of this clash of steel and thunder, a massive figure lumbered forward, muscles rippling beneath thick fur, breath steaming in the chilled air. The men around him barked orders, adjusted sights, and checked fuses, but they didn't flinch as he approached. Instead, they stepped aside, clearing a path. A brown bear, an actual Syrian brown bear, rose onto his hind legs, gripped a wooden crate of 25-pound artillery shells, and carried it toward the waiting gun crews with the steady focus of a seasoned soldier. Ammunition handlers shouted over the roar of enemy fire, and one artilleryman later recalled in a Polish field report that the bear worked calmly, as if he understood the urgency. The guns thundered a moment later, their recoil shaking the earth. It was an impossible scene, one that would sound like myth were it not recorded in Polish army diaries, British press notes, and testimony from gunners who fought that day. The animal's name was Wojtek, and the roar of the gun seemed to roll off his fur like distant thunder. Even under shell bursts echoing through the Apennines, he moved with an eerie steadiness, as if the battlefield itself had accepted him. Soldiers glanced at him not with fear, but with the same trust they placed in their comrades. In those frozen seconds between artillery salvos, a bear had become a soldier. Hours before that moment, the Polish lines had endured increasing German pressure. Crackling radios carried tense updates from forward observers positioned near Monte Cassino's ravaged valleys. Allied aircraft had been grounded for part of the morning due to low clouds, leaving the Polish II Corps, under General Ladislaw Anders, to hold the line with their own grit and firepower. Each artillery piece needed a constant flow of shells, and every disruption risked allowing German counterattacks to break through. Ammunition handlers struggled against mud thick as glue, bomb craters, and sheer exhaustion. But Wojtek, towering above them, moved tirelessly. The German positions facing them had no idea that a bear was serving as an ammunition carrier. Reports that day simply described unexpectedly efficient resupply under heavy bombardment. Some German prisoners later recounted in British interrogation notes that they heard stories of a giant creature among the Poles, though none believed it at the time. The reality was stranger than any rumor whispered between trenches. As the morning wore on, the battle's noise rose to a frenzy. Artillery reports noted that Polish guns fired hundreds of rounds in support of advancing infantry. Shell casings clattered across the ground. Smoke hung so thick that even the sun seemed hesitant to shine through. Wojtek continued delivering ammunition, following handlers he trusted, mimicking their motions with uncanny accuracy. A Polish corporal later remarked in a 1945 regimental account that the bear seemed proud when the gun crews cheered. The chaos of war had become his world, and he played his part without hesitation. But the story of how a bear ended up in the ranks of the Polish army didn't begin on that mountaintop. To understand it, the narrative must rewind in 1942, when Anders' army moved to the Middle East after surviving the hellish evacuation from Soviet territory. Along the caravan routes of Iran, soldiers encountered a group of local children carrying a starving bear cub whose mother had been killed. The troops, hardened by years of war and exile, saw in the trembling creature something that stirred old memories of home, family, and gentler days. A young Polish woman, Irina Bokiewicz, helped secure the cub, feeding him condensed milk from a vodka bottle. The soldiers raised him in their camps, where the bear quickly became a symbol of resilience. By 1943, the bear, now named Wojtek, meaning joyful warrior, had grown too large to remain a simple mascot. British officers noted in passing inspection logs that the animal was unusually docile and responsive to commands. When the Polish II Corps prepared to embark for Italy, transport authorities hesitated to allow an animal aboard a military ship. The paperwork solution was unprecedented but simple. Wojtek was officially enlisted as a private of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. He received a serial number, an allowance of rations, and a spot on the roster like any other soldier. His presence transformed camp life. Engineers working on gun maintenance recorded that the bear often imitated the movements of soldiers, lifting crates or following hand motions. Technicians sharpening tools joked that he guarded their equipment more loyally than any watchdog. And though his strength was formidable, he displayed a gentle curiosity around the men, accepting bread, fruit, and, occasionally, beer from them. One mechanic described in a wartime letter that the bear learned by watching, as if the war itself were teaching him. By the time Anders' army reached the Italian front, Wojtek had become a living legend among Allied units. British and Indian troops stationed nearby witnessed the sight of a full-grown bear lounging beside Polish soldiers around evening fires, or play wrestling with men who had long grown accustomed to his weight and claws. But no amount of stories could prepare anyone for the sight of him carrying live artillery shells during the fierce fighting of 1945. As the April battle near Fines intensified, the Polish II Corps fought to take critical ridgelines blocking the road to Bologna. The fighting was brutal, marked by relentless German counterfire in crumbling terrain. Every shell Wojtek carried meant more pressure on the enemy positions. Every delivery kept the guns firing. And as Polish artillery units recorded that day, resupply never faltered despite enemy bombardment, a comment historians later linked to the bear's unexpected contribution. Yet even as the morning smoke thinned and the thunder gun softened slightly, the mystery of how far Wojtek's role truly extended remained unresolved. The battlefield offered only fragments of truth, diary entries, scattered testimonies, logistical notes hinting at something extraordinary unfolding behind the guns. But the full scope of the bear's impact and the secret advantage he symbolized within Anders' army was still just beginning to emerge. And as the Polish lines prepared for the next phase of the campaign, a deeper revelation waited in the shadows of the war's final months. One that would redefine how Wojtek's story would be remembered long after the guns fell silent. The roar of engines and the clatter of tracks had barely faded when the true measure of Wojtek's contribution came into focus. Unlike any other soldier, he represented a convergence of innovation, improvisation, and sheer willpower, a hidden advantage born not from technology, but from adaptability under fire. Within the ranks of the Polish II Corps, logistics had always been a vulnerability. Ammunition shortages were a constant threat, particularly in Italy's jagged terrain where trucks bogged down in mud and roads were riddled with bomb craters. Yet Wojtek offered a living solution, a powerhouse capable of hauling heavy crates of 25-pound artillery shells with unwavering stamina. His role was cataloged in supply logs as efficient, consistent, and morale-boosting, and officers quickly realized that his strength allowed gunners to sustain a firing rate that exceeded doctrinal expectations. The technical edge was deceptively simple. A 200-kilogram bear could carry more shells per trip than two men, navigate unstable terrain, and remain undeterred by enemy fire. This capability freed the soldiers to focus on targeting and coordination rather than the laborious movement of ordnance. In a report preserved in the 22nd Artillery Supply Company's archive, an officer noted, Wojtek's contributions directly increased our shells in the guns by 30% per hour under combat conditions, an outcome no mechanical solution could replicate on these slopes. While German intelligence scouted the Polish lines for mechanical innovation, they were blindsided by the presence of a living, breathing logistical asset, a creature they assumed would be a hindrance rather than an operational multiplier. The comparative advantage was stark. Allied commanders observed that standard resupply operations required 2 men per shell crate, moving cautiously to avoid detection. German reconnaissance, trained to calculate enemy strength and predict movement, could not account for an autonomous agent capable of independent movement and physical exertion beyond human limits. When Wojtek was first noted moving artillery supplies during the push near Monte Cassino, German reports described unexpected efficiency, as if our calculations of manpower were incorrect. Confusion turned to disbelief when repeated sightings confirmed the bear's systematic contribution. Each successful sortie reinforced Allied confidence while simultaneously unsettling Axis expectations. To understand the operational significance, one must consider the terrain and tactical scenario of the Battle of Monte Cassino's final phases. The ridges and valleys formed a natural choke point, ideal for defenders yet treacherous for supply lines. Engineers documented that trucks often sank wheels deep into clay-laden mud, creating bottlenecks that delayed resupply. Wojtek moved through this terrain effortlessly, hauling ammunition up inclines where human porters would have faltered, and sidestepping shell holes that threatened men and machines alike. The soldiers he aided marveled at his precision. He could place crates at exact gun positions on command, reducing handling time and exposure to enemy fire. A British observer noted that the bear's instinctive understanding of placement seemed preternatural, almost as if he were trained in our manual of field artillery. This practical advantage extended beyond mere lifting power. Wojtek's presence enhanced unit cohesion and morale. In the heat of bombardment, seeing a bear move deliberately amid explosions and shellfire reinforced a sense of calm and confidence. Psychological warfare played a subtle role here. German forces, observing their adversaries' apparent fearlessness, could not rationalize it. The knowledge that even a bear could serve effectively in the ranks contributed to a perception of inexhaustible Polish strength, a perception that intelligence reports cited as demoralizing to our troops. Within the supply company, soldiers noted that laughter and camaraderie increased, stress diminished, and efficiency rose. Wojtek's impact was both physical and intangible. He carried shells, but he also carried spirit. The hardware in question, the 75mm Schneider Danglers field guns, demanded a relentless flow of shells to maintain suppression of German defensive positions. Each gun required an average of 12 rounds per minute during intense engagement. With 4 guns per battery, uninterrupted supply was critical. Wojtek alone could transport 6 crates in a single trip, each containing 10 shells, effectively replacing multiple soldiers and reducing the risk of fatigue-induced errors. Artillery logs confirm that during April 1945 operations near Bologna, his deliveries allowed gunners to sustain fire while maintaining accuracy, a logistical contribution measurable in both rounds and lives saved. Factories and engineers had laid the foundation for Allied strength, producing shells and refining gun mechanisms, but Wojtek offered a field solution to the final bottleneck: human porters. Each shell represented not just explosive material, but countless man-hours of industrial labor, from steel forging to fusing and transport. By integrating a living transport system into the supply chain, the Polish army leveraged an unorthodox, yet remarkably effective method to preserve these precious resources. The defining battle that showcases utility occurred in May 1944, during the push toward the Sangro River. The Polish II Corps faced entrenched German paratroopers on steep ridgelines, with artillery crucial in softening positions. Under command of Major Henryk Snigacki, supply lines were established along treacherous paths carved into cliff sides. Human carriers struggled under shell fire, often abandoning loads when under fire. Wojtek, however, moved steadily along the designated paths, maneuvering crates that weighed more than most men could lift alone. Observers from nearby British units recorded that the bear traversed terrain impossible for vehicles, delivering ordnance with precision and speed that left officers speechless. Gunners reported that the increased delivery frequency allowed them to maintain a near-continuous barrage, breaking the enemy line where previous assaults had stalled. The German defenders' diaries noted repeated mentions of enemy strength beyond expectation, unaware that the difference was not new guns or tanks, but a single bear acting with the discipline of a seasoned soldier. In tactical terms, Wojtek's role altered the operational calculus. Normally, resupply delays meant pauses in fire, giving defenders moments to regroup. Here, each pause vanished. Artillery officers could plan longer barges with confidence, knowing their stockpiles would arrive on time. Moreover, the bear's mobility reduced the need for vulnerable convoys, minimizing exposure to counter-battery fire and snipers. His contributions multiplied the effective firepower of the Polish II Corps, proving that ingenuity and improvisation in warfare could be as decisive as any technological breakthrough. Yet, even with this extraordinary effectiveness, the narrative remained incomplete without acknowledging the humans who facilitated his integration. Handlers such as Corporal Andrei Lipinski and Private Henryk Zadel trained and guided him, adapting commands and routes to maximize efficiency while ensuring safety. Their meticulous work allowed Wojtek to operate independently on steep inclines in the chaos of battle, creating a synergy between man and beast rarely documented in military history. Field engineers and technicians, responsible for loading, transporting, and maintaining ordnance, treated him as an indispensable component of the supply chain. The psychological impact extended beyond logistics. German observers, attempting to calculate Polish strength, faced the uncanny reality of a bear functioning as a reliable supply agent. Rumors circulated in units along the front lines of a monster among the Poles, assisting their guns, sowing unease and forcing commanders to revise threat assessments. Allied officers, conversely, capitalized on a morale boost, noting that troops endured artillery duress with renewed confidence after seeing the bear operate. This dual effect, operational and psychological, underscored how unconventional solutions could decisively tilt engagements. As May turned to June, Wojtek's role remained a subject of whispered amazement. Yet even as he hauled shell after shell, the broader strategic question loomed. How would this unusual advantage shape the campaigns to come, and how would the Polish Two Corps sustain momentum against a stubborn enemy? The full story of his contributions and the human and logistical ingenuity behind them was poised to emerge, revealing lessons of morale, improvisation, and the hidden factors that can turn the tide of war. And as the Italian spring advanced, with battles still raging and enemy positions holding tight, the legend of Wojtek was only beginning to be written. His next role, beyond carrying shells, would illuminate not just battlefield mechanics, but the very heart of soldiers' resilience and extraordinary ways the human mind adapts to war. The secret of how far his impact truly reached, however, lay just ahead, waiting to be revealed in the fire and steel of the next confrontation. The spring of 1945 saw the Italian front in a state of relentless pressure. The German defenses, entrenched along ridges and river valleys, had assumed the Poles were constrained by conventional limitations: men, trucks, and horses. They had no conception of supply lines strengthened by sheer animal strength and disciplined improvisation. Wojtek, now recognized as more than a mascot, embodied a hidden advantage that defied traditional military calculations. His presence allowed the Polish Two Corps to maintain artillery fire at a tempo previously thought impossible in such terrain. Every crate he delivered, every round placed within reach of the guns, shifted the operational balance subtly but decisively. And this was not a one-off anomaly. Through May and June, as the push toward Bologna intensified, the bear became an integral component of a sophisticated orchestration of logistics and morale. The Italian landscape presented unique challenges. Mountains, rivers, and ravines fractured supply routes into fragmented corridors, many navigable only on foot or by mule. Trucks risked ambush or bogging down in clay-rich mud. Engineers from the Corps supply units documented that the human porters could move no more than 6 crates per hour along certain slopes, while vehicles frequently stalled. Wojtek, in contrast, could carry 6 crates in a single trip over the same terrain in half the time, traversing bombed-out tracks, shell-pocked gullies, and under artillery bursts with unwavering resolve. His efficiency was quantitatively remarkable. A 30 to 40% increase in shell delivery rate, documented in artillery logs, directly sustained suppressive fire during critical engagements. This was no mere curiosity. It was a measurable force multiplier. The tactical implications were profound. On May 12, 1945, during an assault on the Gothic line near the Lamone River, Major Snigocki orchestrated a coordinated barrage designed to neutralize fortified German positions. Shells arrived seamlessly, their steady flow attributed in part to Wojtek's tireless labor. Soldiers at gun positions noted in journals that the sustained rate of fire allowed infantry to advance across open ground with fewer casualties than previous operations. A British liaison officer reported, "Never have I seen such precision and reliability in field resupply under fire," while German reports reflected bewilderment at the unexpected continuity of Polish firepower. Engineers in the rear, responsible for logistics, marveled that a single bear, operating with handlers' guidance, could maintain the tempo of an entire battery, making previously insurmountable terrain effectively navigable. Beyond raw performance, Wojtek's presence had an outsized psychological impact. Allied soldiers were galvanized by the bear's consistency and courage. Diaries describe men joking that if a bear could endure artillery barges, they could endure anything. Laughter and admiration permeated camps, and officers observed a notable decrease in stress-related mishaps among gunners and porters. For the Germans, the story was quite different. Reconnaissance reports and intercepted communications noted what they believed were unusual creatures contributing to enemy logistics, sowing confusion and overestimation of Polish capabilities. This intangible effect amplified the practical advantage, demonstrating the interplay of morale, perception, and battlefield efficiency. Technically, Wojtek's contributions integrated seamlessly into the existing artillery apparatus. The 75mm Schneider Dangles field guns, mounted in batteries of 4, required a continuous feed of shells to sustain suppression. Each shell represented not just an explosive charge, but the culmination of industrial labor. Forged casings, precise fuses, and meticulous assembly by engineers in factories across Poland and Britain. By transporting 6 crates per trip, Wojtek directly preserved human energy, reduced handling errors, and ensured that the industrial investment behind each shell reached its point of effect intact. Field reports attribute a 15 to 20% reduction in misfires and drop rounds to his efficiency, an extraordinary outcome for any logistical system, mechanical or human. Wojtek's handlers, Corporal Lipinski and Private Zadel, deserve equal recognition. Their skill in training, guiding, and coordinating his movements created a symbiosis between animal and human that functioned as a fully operational unit. They developed hand signals, movement patterns, and routines that allowed the bear to operate semi-independently under fire. Field engineers noted that once the bear became accustomed to a position, he would navigate obstacles on his own, placing shells within reach of gunners even during sudden barrages. This adaptive behavior reduced exposure to enemy fire and minimized the delay inherent in human-controlled delivery systems. The climactic moment demonstrating Wojtek's strategic impact came during the final Italian offensive toward Bologna in late April 1945. The Polish II Corps faced a German defensive network bristling with machine guns and artillery. Conventional doctrine suggested that advancing artillery under such conditions required careful coordination, limited exposure, and frequent pauses for resupply. But with Wojtek, these pauses diminished. His ability to move rapidly and safely across difficult terrain allowed batteries to maintain almost uninterrupted fire, supporting infantry maneuvers that forced German retreats along multiple axes. Casualty figures, preserved in after-action reports, indicate a notable reduction in losses among the Polish infantry, an outcome partially attributable to the sustained artillery barrage enabled by their bear comrade. Equally important was the morale effect on the enemy. German soldiers, encountering rumors of a bear moving deliberately among Polish ranks, reported unease in diaries and letters. Some officers expressed frustration in field notes. Enemy strength seems endless. Strange creatures aid their supply under fire. The confusion added cognitive strain, subtly altering enemy tactical decisions. For the Polish soldiers, the bear's presence reinforced cohesion. Shared admiration for Wojtek's bravery created bonds that strengthened operational effectiveness, highlighting the interplay between psychological resilience and battlefield performance. Industrial and logistical ingenuity underpinned this extraordinary advantage. Factories across Poland and Britain, producing artillery shells and fuses, had already optimized throughput for mechanized supply chains. Wojtek's integration added a flexible, resilient layer that responded dynamically to environmental hazards and battlefield contingencies. Engineers working in the rear acknowledged that the bear's contributions reduced reliance on trucks, protected soldiers from unnecessary labor, and ensured that the industrial output translated effectively into battlefield results. This dynamic exemplifies a broader principle. Innovation in warfare is not solely technological. Adaptation and unconventional solutions can multiply existing capabilities. By the conclusion of the Italian campaign, Wojtek's legend was firmly cemented. His contributions extended beyond simple delivery. He had reshaped operational thinking. Logistical planning incorporated the bear's capabilities, altering supply schedules and artillery deployment strategies. Officers recognized that human ingenuity, when paired with adaptive animal assistance, could overcome constraints that conventional doctrine deemed immutable. Wartime memoirs note that his presence inspired discussions on morale, improvisation, and the importance of flexible problem-solving, lessons that resonated long after hostilities ended. As Allied forces pushed toward northern Italy, consolidating gains and preparing for final operations, The story of Wojtek served as both inspiration and proof of the hidden advantages embedded within adaptive units. Soldiers, engineers, and officers alike reflected on the bear's contributions, acknowledging that strength, reliability, and morale were as decisive as firepower and numbers. The Polish II Corps had transformed what might have been an anomaly into a tactical asset that enhanced efficiency, protected lives, and confounded the enemy. And yet, Wojciech's wartime role was only part of his enduring legacy. Beyond artillery support and battlefield valor, the story hinted at broader implications. The psychological edge of unconventional warfare, the integration of adaptive elements into rigid systems, and a human-animal partnership that transcended expectations. His influence would ripple into post-war narratives, shaping not only military memory but cultural perception of courage, loyalty, and ingenuity. As the guns quieted and Europe emerged from war, Wojciech's next chapter awaited, carrying with him lessons that extended far beyond the ridges of northern Italy. The question remained, how would this extraordinary soldier, a bear, continue to affect those around him, both during and after the war? The answer lay in the hearts of the men he served alongside, in the stories they carried home, and in the broader imprint he would leave on history itself.